Well, hey, fifth grade, it's been like a week since I've made a video, since you've been working on that project, which was a test grade. Overall, you guys did a phenomenal job describing different fictional stories or different writings of how blood moves through the body. I hope you guys understand now how the chambers of the heart work, how the arteries, veins, and capillaries all kind of work together to circulate that blood through your body. And then also, it was really, really cool. I've heard from some of you and from some of your parents about the marine biologist veterinarian that we got to listen to on Tuesday, how cool it was to hear how the same systems that we have in our bodies, how similar that is to some of the marine life that is right out our couple miles down the road from us. For me, some of the really cool ones that we heard was Smiley Cyrus. I thought that was pretty cool, how the big flaps behind were her gills. So that was pretty cool. The way that shark's blood works, how it's super thick to make sure that it stays hydrated. Did you guys know that even fish and marine life can get dehydrated and that their body is constantly pushing out salt? I didn't know that, so I thought that was pretty cool. And then we learned about how some marine animals have different hearts than what our hearts look like. Some of them had only 2 chambers, some of them had 3 chambers, but we have how many chambers? That's right, 4 chambers. And it was just super cool to hear how the blood gets moved through their body. So today we're going to be looking at specifically what is in our blood, and there are 4 parts that we're going to be looking at for the types of materials that we have in our blood and what each one does specifically. Over the next couple of days, we're going to look specifically at how red blood cells work in our body and what their job and function is. We're going to look at white blood cells and the different types of white blood cells. We're going to look at platelets, and we're also going to look at the plasma that all of these blood cells are moving through. Kind of think of it this way. You guys ever have like a Jell-O salad where someone has made Jell-O and there's been bits of like fruit put in there? So you have the Jell-O itself, and then you may have like some pineapple and maybe a cherry and some mandarin oranges, like crushed pineapple. What else? Marshmallows. I don't know what people put in Jell-O salads. I can't say I've ever made one. But our blood is kind of the same way. That Jell-O material is kind of like the substance that holds our blood together, which we're going to be looking at. It's called plasma. And then each of those parts, the cherry, the crushed pineapple, the mandarin oranges, each of those would represent the types of blood cells, or the cells that are in our body, and how they work for us and fight for us. So we're going to look at those components today, and then over the next couple of days, we're going to look at, again, what each of those parts do. So have any of you ever been cut to the point where you're like, I'm losing too much blood, or you know someone that's had that? I've had a couple of really bad cuts, but nothing where I was like, oh, I'm going to die. But our body is constantly making new blood for itself. So even if you cut yourself, eventually it stops. Now, remember we talked about all the different capillaries and all the different blood vessels in our bodies, especially like our fingers and toes and our face and mouth and lips. Like those have a lot of blood vessels, so they bleed a lot. Doesn't take much. I once cut my pinky. I don't know if you can see the scar. Let me see. There's a little scar right at the tip. Yeah, I don't know if you can see that. But I'm chopping some onions, and I sliced the tip of my pinky right off. And well, not off, it was a big flap. And it just bled and bled and bled and kept bleeding and kept bleeding. And for those of you that hate blood stories, just go along with me. And there were so many blood vessels here that it just keeps bleeding. Well, what happens when I lose that blood? Or let's think about people who go and donate blood. We know we have the big red bus that comes to our campus every once in a while, and students can go and donate blood. So what happens when they remove a bunch of blood from our body? Do we just go without? No, our body actually makes more blood to replace any blood that's been lost. And most of the blood cells form in what's called our bone marrow. So if I was to take my arm and just go cut it right off, and I could take this and just kind of turn it and show you the inside of my bone, okay? The inside of my bone, in the middle of it, has what we call bone marrow. And the bone marrow there produces red blood cells and white blood cells and produces the blood that we need in order for our body to be healthy and function properly. So it can start in the bone marrow, but then it can move to other organs to finish the process, like our spleen. You ever hear of our spleen? Most people are like, what does the spleen do? Not much, but it actually helps with making a small amount of blood cells. And also our lymph nodes. You ever get sick and you feel like the bumps in your throat or under your chin? Those are your lymph nodes. Some of them will actually produce blood as well. So we know the circulatory system is more than just our heart, because we have all those blood vessels that work with it to carry blood to and from different parts of our body, carrying that oxygen and bringing back that carbon dioxide so that we can exhale it. It carries this amazing life-giving blood. Now, an adult usually has about 4.7 liters. That's about 5 quarts of blood that's flowing through our bodies. And blood has 3 very important jobs. We're going to look at those 3 important jobs. First, our blood transports substances around the body. So as the blood circulates, it's completing its second job. So again, its first job is blood. It simply transports substances around the body. Well, what substances? Like nutrients and all the different blood cells. So number 1, our blood transports substances around the body. So what is the second job? Second, as the blood circulates, it helps to keep the body's temperature at about 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. That is a healthy body temperature. If it goes any higher, around 100 degrees or more, it means that your body is fighting some sort of infection, and that's where part of your blood cells actually kick in that increase your temperature. But anything lower than that, it can hurt our body as well. So we are considered warm-blooded creatures because the blood that's circulating through our body is what's keeping us warm. We don't have to have the sun to keep us warm. Our blood does that. So again, first thing, blood transports things around our body. Second thing, the blood circulates to keep our body temperature at a nice, cozy 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. The third job blood has is it helps defend the body against infections and diseases. We have these awesome white blood cells right here, and we have several types of white blood cells that are in our body. This picture right here is a picture of through an electron telescope of what a white blood cell would look like. And all of these are what type of cell? Can you guess? It's kind of hard. Just kidding. They are red blood cells, and they're red blood cells because they look red. And what makes them red is the way that oxygen and iron kind of combine. We have iron in our blood, and the oxygen in our blood make it this nice red color. You kind of think of it this way. If you have metals that rust is kind of like a red color. Well, that's a combination of iron and oxygen mixing. So in our blood, that's why our blood looks really red in our arteries. And again, when we see what looks like blue blood in our veins, it's because it's just a less concentration of oxygen in that blood and the way the light reflects off our skin. So again, third job, helps defend the body against infections with our white blood cells, and our red blood cells are carrying the oxygen. So blood is made up of mostly plasma, and it also has red blood cells, white blood cells, this little section right here, and then platelets. Now let's look at the way that this is made up. This is our pie chart right here. Plasma takes up about 62%, we'll average it, about 57% of the contents of our blood. So if I was to take just one drop, if I pricked my finger and took one drop of blood, in that one drop, about 57% of that would be plasma. Oops, go back. Then what's the next biggest part? That's right, our red blood cells here. Our red blood cells take up about 43% of what is in blood. And then we have this little tiny section of platelets and a little tiny section of white blood cells. So what is plasma? Plasma is the liquid part of blood, and it's usually a clear yellowish liquid that is mostly water. Now, why do you think we would have mostly water in our blood? Yeah, we have mostly water so that blood can flow through our veins easily. If we start to remove some water from our blood, what could happen? We get really dehydrated. It makes it very difficult for our blood to flow through our body and get that life-saving oxygen to all the cells that are in our body. So the plasma can dissolve a lot of different substances like proteins, sugars, and nutrients. So that plasma, anytime we eat stuff and we get the good nutrients that enter our body, we get things like proteins and sugars and minerals and all that stuff. In order for it to get to different parts of our body, it has to be dissolved. And in order for it to get dissolved, our plasma does that. Once it's dissolved in our blood, it then carries those substances to all different parts of the body. Why would it be important then to have a lot of plasma in our blood? Yeah, that's right. We have a lot of these different proteins and sugars and nutrients that need to have space and need to have a lot of liquid to be dissolved in. Now, the blood then carries these substances to all parts of the body. Just like blood takes oxygen to all parts of our body and brings back carbon dioxide from those parts of our body for us to exhale, blood carries those substances like proteins and sugars and other nutrients to all parts of our body. Then we have red blood cells and white blood cells and platelets that are also floating in this substance that we call plasma. So you can see again, here's all the red blood cells, here's some white blood cells, and these little tiny things are called platelets, and we'll talk about those at another time. So here's a crazy thing. One tiny drop of blood, so remember, if I take a pin and poke my finger, one tiny drop of blood contains at least 5 million red blood cells. Think about that. Little tiny, tiny, tiny drop contains 5 million red blood cells. It also contains about 8,000 white blood cells and about 250,000 platelets. That is a lot of stuff going on in one tiny drop. And you know what's crazy? All it took was just one drop of Jesus' blood to wash away our sins. And here we have about 5 quarts of that in our body. All right, so let's review what we have already learned. We've learned that our blood has 4 parts to it, and it has plasma, it has red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. And we talked about plasma today, how plasma takes up the most part of our blood, and it's this yellowish, clear liquid that's mostly made up of water, and it dissolves different things like proteins and sugars and other nutrients in order to get it things in our blood to travel to all parts of our body. 1 drop of blood has about 8,000 white blood cells, about 5 million red blood cells. Tomorrow we'll talk more about what our red blood cells do specifically. For your assignment today, you need to comment below with 2 things that you learned about the parts of the blood. All right, guys? I will see you tomorrow. Love you guys and miss y'all.